everyone. Hi, Michael.
Hi, how are you?
Well, how am I? I am amazing.
Why is that?
Well, because anybody who knows me, or maybe I've even talked about it on the podcast before, knows that I love wallpaper. And I have been planning this wallpaper design work in my condo, and it's literally going up as we speak upstairs. And it looks amazing. I'm very excited.
Well, we hope to see it on the Instagram.
Sure. It'll be there for sure. Well, thank you for coming on and co-hosting with me today. I know you're no stranger to the podcast. And it's a topic I've wanted to cover for a bit because there are definitely people who need to hear this information. And I think that they wouldn't necessarily want to ask an agent. So instead, we're putting that information out there for people to find. And of course, they're welcome to ask us questions. But the topic is, how do you choose your agent? And right, exactly. And one might think at this now that I'm saying that this is going to be pitched towards telling everybody to pick one of us. Which, I mean, of course, we both love to get new clients, and that's great. And referrals are wonderful. But as we're going to talk about for the next 20 to 30 minutes, that we're not always going to be the right person for them, right? So yeah. So I think this is a good thing for us to put out there. And so I want to start with some basics, because some nomenclature and verbiage about and things that we say, I think, confuse people sometimes. And so like we can just start really by saying, like, what does a real estate agent do? Like, what does a real estate agent do? Like, how would you answer that question?
Well, I mean, for the most part, we are there to shepherd them through the process, whether it is uh, buying a home or selling a home. We're there to kind of guide them in the process. More specifically, we write contracts, we negotiate deals on both sides of the deal. And then we also really have to be the experts on what the current market is doing, and we inform them on that, and we educate them on that. Educating is basically job number one of any real estate agent. With a seller, we're educating them what the market's doing right now. With a buyer, we're doing that as well as teaching them how to buy a house and what all goes into that, assuming they don't already know. And then we're really just kind of helping them to understand like what goes into the buying process, and then what happens after they buy it.
Right.
If it's a buyer, we're getting them, contractors, or we're helping them to decide, what they're going to do to the house after they buy it. If it's a seller, we're telling them what to do before they put it on the market. We're just kind of focusing on, making sure that the process is smooth, whatever that means, from writing the contract, securing the deal, to post deal, making sure that it's all a smooth process.
So I think the catch-all phrase I've used several times and to lots of people is that we are the project manager when this situation is happening, when you're buying, selling, or even renting home. I work with renters. You've worked with renters before. Mm-hmm. Can somebody do this on their own? Pretty much everybody can do everything on their own at some point in life if you really want to put in enough hard work, effort, and figure things out. But you hire professionals for a reason, because they know how to do it more efficiently, better. It doesn't mean you can't replicate it, but it's probably going to be very hard for somebody to replicate that on their own. So you want a good project manager who's going to help you, get a place for as little as possible, and with as few headaches when you're a buyer, and you want to get as much money and as few headaches as possible when you're the seller. And the renter usually just wants to get a place that they like and make sure that the terms are fair. And, so that's how I would really, really put it.
Well, I mean, to that point, I've had so many clients who've said, "You're so calm during this," and I think that's because that's why you hire an agent, because we've done this so many times. There's not really anything that comes up that's new. I mean, there's always something that you're like,
literally every transaction is something new.
Wait, what? But like, you've done it so many times that it's like, okay, we can handle this. This is how we attack it.
And we have the resources.
Yes,
we have
exactly.
the resources is what it comes down to. I have a real estate attorney, on my speed dial effectively. I know who to call about what. We have brokers, and actually this is a good segue into who is what and what these terms mean. But we have those resources, and that's what's important. And unfortunately or fortunately, with real estate, things move at a pace and they are timed out very specifically according to legal documents. So you can't like willy-nilly find an answer to something sometimes when you have time. It has to
Yep.
be, it's, right now. Um, so I just mentioned the term broker, and this comes up all the time when I'm talking to people. And I think partially because it's jurisdictional, as in different
Mhm.
states call different people different things. But I want to cover the difference between a real estate agent and a realtor first. So
Okay.
you want to tackle this one?
Sure. So real estate agent is kind of a catch-all term for anybody who is licensed to sell real estate, whereas a realtor is somebody who is also a member of the National Association of Realtors. The National Association of Realtors is the trade association for the entire industry. They have specific rules and regulations. We've, as members of the National Association of Realtors, we agree to abide by the laws of the jurisdiction in which we, practice, which you would think everyone does, but you'd be surprised. However, the more important part of that is that the National Association of Realtors makes us hold to a certain set of ethics that
Hmm.
really protect the consumer.
Yep.
They protect the consumer, and they also regulate the way that we interact with one another.
Yep.
And so those people who are able to call themselves realtors um, have agreed to live by a certain code and an ethical standard that real estate agents and licensees are not. And
Yep.
that's the real difference between a real estate agent and a realtor. So, like, you'll notice, like, it'll either be like there's very specific IP rules that NAR makes us follow for using the term realtor, but it has to be in all capital letters, or you'll see it with the circle R next to it. And actually, to be able to say that you are a realtor, you have to be a member of the National Association of Realtors.
Right.
Otherwise, they'll call themselves real estate consultants or real estate agents or real estate salespeople. Like, there's different terms that they use that get around calling themselves realtors. But if they're calling themselves a realtor, then you can be fairly certain, unless they're breaking the rules, that they are being held to a different standard and a higher standard
A higher
than
ethical
other
standard.
folks. Yeah,
Sure. And I
yeah.
think, not that this is where I want this conversation to go to, but I think real estate and ethics, that's been a topic that's come up for decades, right? So
Mhm.
to know that your agent is also a realtor, and is held to a higher standard, I think would make a lot of people feel more comfortable. Um, but yeah, so that was really important to cover. I use both terms about myself, depending sometimes on who I'm talking to. If I think somebody's getting confused by a topic or whatever, um, just so happens that you and I are both realtors. We are part of NAR. So, okay, wanted to do that one. So then there's broker versus agent or realtor. We'll just say realtor right now. So I can start to cover this one. So a broker in the areas that we work, so DC, Maryland, and Virginia, is somebody who's done additional coursework. Basically, I think you have to have been a real estate agent for at least 2 years, and that technically makes you a broker. Now, in the case of Compass, where you and I work, the brokers that we refer to are those who are usually held in a higher position, who are overseeing the real estate agents and realtors. They, again, I'm speaking for our specific company right now, because I can't speak for the inner workings of many others, but they all have a wealth of experience. So that's usually your first stop as an agent or realtor when you need to get advice or figure out, like I said, one of those tricky situations that happens on almost every single deal. Then you go to them, and if you're not even sure if you should be calling an attorney or if you should be calling this person or the other person, they're a great resource. What else do you want to add to kind of the difference between a broker?
I would say, you can be a broker and be a salesperson. So you can
Yep.
do both. There are
Right.
there are those who, and there are even those who are brokers who've gone through that extra training, who don't supervise anybody. They've
Right.
just gone through the extra training, and they uh, just want to sell. But if in order to be a salesperson, you have to have a broker. Somebody has to supervise you in the jurisdictions that we work in. So you can't just be a salesperson and be kind of out there floating in the wind. Somebody
Right.
has to supervise you. So know that when you hire a real estate agent, you also have you actually technically have a relationship with the broker, not with the agent themselves. They're assigning you the right to work with that client,
Right.
but the broker is a resource to the agent, and the agent can use that broker to help them kind of, as you said, navigate those more tricky situations. But know that when you're hiring an agent, whether it's a solo agent or a group, you have the backing of that broker no matter what. So
Right. 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 So there you go with the verbiage. And just so, and this is important. And I said it's jurisdictional because in New York, I think you
they're
hire
all
a broker.
brokers.
They're all brokers. Exactly. And this all comes down to the fact that this is all state, like a lot of real estate is driven by state law. And so that's why it can be different in various areas. So yes, it can get very confusing. And was it worth spending 10 minutes on that? I think so, because this stuff comes up all the time. And also, I think people feel dumb asking those questions. I've had people who, like, after I've been working with them for weeks, they kind of like slide, like on the side, kind of whispered me, like, I thought you were a fill in a different term. And I'm like, oh no. And I explained to them. So you don't want anyone in a position of buying, selling, or renting a home to not even understand like what the person is, or the relationships of a broker and agent and all that kind of stuff.
Well, to that end, even like now that there's so many teams, people get confused when they say, like, we both have our own separate teams, but like, when you see the Fowler group or the Rare, they don't understand like that's a part of a bigger company, which is Compass in our case.
Yeah.
And they think, oh, you started your own real estate company. It's like, no, we're all just like, because of the way that the industry is going, we're all starting to form teams. And within those teams, we have agents, and some teams have brokers, some do not. But at the end of the day, we all work for whatever our larger real estate company is, our brokerage. And under that brokerage, there's a broker. And then teams, we usually have a team leader. It's just a lot of different terms and a lot of different things that gets things very confusing. So we can
How about
totally
this? We'll
understand why.
draw a tree for anybody
Yeah,
who wants to know. Let me
put
know.
a
You guys can
anagram.
you can ping me or DM me or whatever, and I'll explain how it all works. But yeah, so yeah, it is. I mean, even when I started in real estate, I was kind of confused because sometimes it refers to broker in paperwork when it's talking about, in our case, Compass. But I was thinking, well, my broker is the person I go to who kind of hired me at the brokerage. It can get confusing. So the point is, you need to make sure that somebody who is licensed who is helping you. That's the most
Well, that's
important
actually a
thing.
good point, because you can go on to whatever your jurisdiction is, if it's DC, Maryland, Virginia, wherever, and see, you can pull up their license.
Yeah.
So you can, I don't think I've ever had anybody that has done that, but that is a resource available if you're concerned, just like you would do if like you want to get like a licensed plumber or licensed, whatever. You can check to make sure that they're licensed via the regulating websites and whatnot. So
Yeah, and I just want to go on record as saying I think that a lot of the reason why we haven't seen that maybe is that we work for an excellent brokerage, and our colleagues and the people we tend to work with are just really awesome and kind of top notch. So I'm sure that this kind of stuff happens where people do want to check out a reference or understand who people are. And we'll get to more of how you kind of really select your agent later. But yeah, it can be overwhelming. And this is we're not even talking about the process itself, right? We're not even talking about buying, selling, or renting right now. It's just
this
finding
is like
somebody to help you do that.
step -1. Like,
Yeah.
it's not even like the first step.
Step -1, yes. Um, okay, so the only other thing that the next thing, and we're kind of starting to go down now, is a buyer's agent versus a listing agent. And I mean, we can even add in a renter's agent, I guess, in there. Um, you want to start with that? What do you feel? How do you feel about that? Are there buyer's agents and listing agents?
So this is a tricky one, because some companies and some groups, like we talked about with groups, hire people specifically to be buyers agents. There are some people who are, that is all they do, is they are the buyers agents, and then usually the team leader or somebody that's like a more experienced agent will be the listing agent. Um, but many and most of the people that I work with and know do both. So, the buyer's agent is the one who takes people out on showings, they negotiate the contracts, they essentially work for the buyer, and they do only buyers type work. Listing agents are exactly that. They list homes, they, do the comparative market analysis, they figure out what the home is worth, they market it, etc. Um, but they're not two different people in most cases. So the person that sells you your home can usually also be the person that sells your home,
Yep.
unless they are a very specific type of person. And they should be able to let you know if you contact them and say, "Hey, I want you to list my home." Um, that they're not the right person. They may refer you to their team leader or whatever. But in most cases, the buyer's agent is also able to be your listing agent as well. There's usually not one or the other.
Right. So it's not two different licenses, right?
Right.
No one's licensed differently. It's not like you're allowed or not allowed to do that, at least under the eyes of the law. If there's a team or something and you're not allowed to, that's specific to a team and the inner workings of that team. But yeah, no, I mean, really it comes down to a skill set.
Mhm.
There are different things you have to do for a listing. There are different things you have to do to help somebody purchase, and there are different things you have to do for a rental. Um, they all involve paperwork. They all could involve negotiating. They involve a lot of the same stuff. I mean, even though when you're selling a home, you're listing it, sorry, you're pulling comps to know how to price it. But the buyer's agent's doing the same thing to figure out how much to offer on that place.
Mhm.
So it's not like, certain agents only have access to certain information or anything like that. Um, Personally, I had about an even split between both buying and selling this past couple of years. I still do work with renters. I know there are agents who choose not to. Doesn't mean they can't. That's just a personal decision that they've made to either work with rental clients or not. So I also wanted to put that out there because, you know, there's a difference between a specialty or something people enjoy doing more versus not being allowed to do a certain kind of transaction
Right.
legally.
Yeah, and I mean, they're to that same end. Listing agents sometimes just don't want to work with buyers. They don't want to take people around the car and show them 8 million places, and then maybe they'll buy one, maybe they won't. They want the guarantee of like, I'm going to throw something on the market and it's going to sell no matter what,
Yeah.
as long as I price it right and etc. But so like there are agents who say like, I'm only going to be a listing agent, and if you want to buy something, then I'm going to put you with my you know teammate who does buying.
Right.
And so there is that, but there's no reason that one person can't do both unless it's personal preference. So
Right. Okay. Well, now that we're even halfway through this, we should probably give people some advice and some help and how they actually choose the person that they want to work with. So, um, you know, the main piece of advice that I tell people is that let's just say you're looking at three different agents. Okay. How do you even get those three different agents? I think the most common way is to ask people who you trust and know if they've worked with anybody. That tends to be one of the best ways to start. It doesn't mean you have to pick that person, but it's a good place to start because anybody can invest in search engine optimization to try to get like the top hit. If you Google something, which is not to say that you shouldn't do it, but it's always good to have people that you know and trust and ask them maybe who they've worked with in the past, right? So that's a good starting point. But assuming we get to that point and we've now gotten, three people or four people, we picked them whatever way, you really want to compare the agent's experiences and their approaches. Um, the main thing for me, if when I was a buyer before I even thought about going into real estate, was establishing rapport and that feeling I had when I spoke to somebody. Are they talking down to me? Do I feel that way? Maybe they're not. Maybe that's just how I'm interpreting it. Are they explaining things to me in a way that makes sense to me? Are they pushy? Are they chill? Things that speak to my needs and my wants. That is paramount because I think you can convince yourself that you want the person who's the best at XYZ, but if you don't mesh with them, if you don't like them, I think it makes for an exceptionally hard transaction. And so for me, that's like a number one.
Yeah, and I actually had an experience this weekend where I was at a lunch with some friends who had just sold their house, and not with me. And I've known these people for 20 years. And they said, we went with the expert of the neighborhood that we were selling in. He's the one that sold our house. He'd actually sold the same house 5 times. And they were like, but we didn't jive with him at all. And it made it a bad experience. Like it was, this person did not do a bad job selling their house. He sold it quickly. He's like, but like every time we spoke, I felt like I wanted to just scream. And they're like, and
Oh
I was like,
man.
but at the same time, on that same token, they said we didn't want to go with a friend because if it did become contentious, um, we didn't want to lose a friendship over it. So
That's a big
there's
one.
so there's a couple of those, and I've actually, I mean, I would say a good 75% of my sales are to people who are in my social circle, my orbit, or whatever.
Mhm.
And I've never had one go so bad that I've lost the friendship over it. So knock on wood. But there are people that are comforted by going with somebody that's a social acquaintance or a friend. There's some people who are uncomfortable by that because it is a big financial decision. So,
Yep.
those are two things that you want to figure out. Like, your personal rapport with that person is so important, and it doesn't matter necessarily how experienced they are, how great they are. As you mentioned, being pushy, like, if they're a buyer's agent and their main concern is getting a check, that's going to affect your experience because they're going to say, "Great, this house, meets none of your needs, but I
But
need to
buy
get a
it.
pay.
Yeah.
I need a paycheck in 30 days, so
Yep.
buy this house."
Yep.
Whereas, like, my biggest thing, and I think most reputable agents is going to be, I want this person to love their home and then call me in a year and say, I have a friend who's looking to buy a house. Can you help them out because I had such a good experience with you?
Yeah.
And hopefully they do that time and time again, and that's how you build a business.
Right.
And I think that's super important, is making sure that like your vibe is good with that person. You feel like they have your best interests at heart,
Yep.
and there is a certain amount of like knowing what they're doing, and obviously having a good agent that knows what they're
Yeah.
doing is vital. But like feeling like they are looking out for you is
Right.
probably more important than anything.
Right.
So
Right. Right. Well, I mean, part of this goes back to our whole ethics and stuff, and like we basically say as realtors that we are acting in the best interest of our clients.
mhm,
The best interest of one of my client was putting their whole search on hold after months and months and months and months of looking, you know? Was it a bummer for me? Sure, but we all have professional bummers that happen. But that's life, right?
yeah,
That's part of the risk of being in real estate.
yeah.
And so was I going to do anything other than support them 100%? No, that's it. Like this is what they need to do. There's a difference between uh, challenging somebody to consider different things that could happen. Like, well, if you wait, let's just remember interest rates might go up and blah blah. Based on the market we're in right now, blah 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 blah. But I'm not pushing you at all. I just want you to have all the facts in front of you. That's way different than saying, like, but that's so silly. You've said you wanted to buy by this date, and like, here's the
Mhm.
date. You know. Um.
And
So yeah.
there's been times when I've challenged people and said, "Hey, we saw one like this 3 months ago, and you were absolutely in love with it. What's changed?" Or like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I think this is a very similar one to that. Or calling people on like, what's challenging them on their decision making process, but then like saying, at the end of the day, like, it's your decision. I always say, like, I'm entitled to an opinion, not a vote. And that's kind of what I live by, is like, I can tell you like, hey, I like this, or I don't like this, or whatever, or
Right.
I think this is the right fit based on your criteria. But at the end of the day, it's their decision.
Right.
So I think you want to make sure that like whoever you're working with has the listening ability to listen to what you're saying, digest what you're saying, and then kind of interpret it back to you. But
Right.
not be so pushy that they're wanting you to take the first thing you see, or take the
Right.
first offer you get,
Right.
assuming it's not a great offer.
And I don't
So
want to discount any of the stuff that you and I are talking about right now, but I think a lot of people might be listening right now and saying, well, how do I know those things in the beginning? And the thing is, you might not,
mhm,
right? I mean, you can ask questions and ask people how they handle things, like ask the agents how they handle certain kinds of situations. But I think a lot of this comes down to making sure that you've got clear lines of communication so that you can usually evaluate communication styles pretty quickly. So
Hmm.
I'd say evaluating your communication styles. Do you want to hear from Sunny quickly? Do you want their do you hear them talking very opinionated in the beginning, or are they being very just kind of matter of fact about things? And does that jive with you? That's I think that's kind of paramount and in the beginning stages of picking. I read something in a Forbes article recently that stuck out to me. It said, choose the person, not the experience. But I want to quickly get to some of the experience parts of this because I've butted up against this a couple of times. So um, you start looking for somebody. Do you look for somebody who has a number of sales in a specific subsection of a market? Is that like, let's say you want to buy a 7-bedroom house in Potomac? Should you only be looking at agents who buy and sell 7-bedroom houses in Potomac? I think it's a factor. I don't think it is the end all be all. What I want to point out is that all of us agents have access to the same information. And somebody who does a very small piece of the market a lot probably has a lot of information in their heads already without having to necessarily look it up as much because they sold 4 places in the neighborhood. But so it doesn't mean though that we've literally never sold a house at all in Potomac, but does it mean that I can't do that? No, it just means that I'm going to have to do a little bit more work to figure out what those values and numbers are.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
But I think it's also just like, we go back to that personality thing. If you're really concerned with making sure that who you have is out for you and, person number one, you know, then go with the personality. If you really want that person that like is the top agent in your neighborhood, but may not, as I said before, may not give you the best experience, and you may want to scream every time you deal with them, then go with that. But like,
Right.
it's also not an and or. The best agent in that neighborhood may also be the person who you drive with
Right.
the best, and maybe
Totally.
you put them in the mix, and that maybe that's one of the things. Maybe you go to Facebook and you ask your Facebook friends like, hey, who did you guys use? And maybe you ask your friend who just bought a house, hey, who did you use? And then maybe you also throw into the mix that neighborhood expert and just see who you jive with the best, and see like, um, out of those three, like who is the best fit for you.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
it's not the person who sells every house in the neighborhood. Maybe it is that person who your friend used to buy their 1-bedroom condo that you're now going to use to buy the seven
And
bedroom
maybe
house in
it's the
Potomac.
person you meet at an
Yeah,
open house. I mean, like
yeah,
it doesn't have to be any of this stuff. The point is like you should be factoring all these things in. So now that we're 7 minutes into this episode, maybe we're not giving anybody some clear cut ways to find a good agent.
sure.
But I think, it's that's it's because when you're new, you do pick up people at open houses. And I did. And some
Mm,
of my favorite clients and the best transactions I had were with people I met at an open house years ago.
yeah.
So, I think they got to know me as a person, like my personality has always been the same. And I've always given this kind of energy to it. And then maybe that's what they were responded to. Um,
Mm.
but yeah. Okay. So a couple more quick things. So single person versus a team.
I mean, that's an interesting question, because there are, again, and I'm going to give a non-answer answer to this, but basically, there are those teams where they have a very, large team, and you may be hiring the person whose name is on the masthead, but you may not ever interact with that person that's on the masthead. You may interact with their buyer's agent who they've referred you to, or you may, work with a junior agent on their team. And you may be saying like, oh, XYZ agent is the expert in this neighborhood. I want to work with them. And you may be working with a new person, and never interacting with that person. So there are benefits to having a solo agent where it's like you're only working with that person. But it's all going to come down to, really, if you want to have access to an agent of some sort 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a team may be better for you, because
Right.
they're going to have people who can show you a house at the drop of a hat, or they're going to have resources to give you. But then solo agents, you often have collaborative collaborations with other agents, so they can make that happen as well. but it may not be the same,
Just
quickness
like
or same
showings. I
expediency.
mean,
Yeah.
like, hey, can you do a showing for me? No, I'm out of town if I'm a solo agent. Like, you
Mhm.
and I have leaned on each other before to do showings, and, there are people who will do that, but with a team that might not be as big of an issue. So,
Mhm.
again, it's kind of dependent
Yeah.
on your timeline and your speed and all those kinds of
Yeah.
things.
And there are like, I think there's benefits to teams, but I don't think that like, you're gonna experience it as much as a client choosing a team over a solo agent. I think it really comes down to, once again, I think we're gonna beat this horse till it's 10 feet down. I think it comes down to personality and who you jive with the best.
Yeah.
So
All right, a couple quick notes. We're going to wrap this up. So, condo versus single family home, kind of people who work in those, it's the same thing for me. It's kind of like, it's the same thing as like, the person who knows the neighborhood or doesn't know the neighborhood as well. Like, we really can do it all. I think you just, if it's important to you, that's fine. Um, I yeah, I like to think I'm a jack of all trades. I feel like I can honestly do anything in any jurisdiction, and it's not cocky because I'm confident in my ability to figure things out if I don't know it.
yeah.
I don't like feeling like I'm not evaluated as somebody who can do something because I don't have, 20 sales in that area. But if it means something to you, or if you know it's going to eat at you as a client, but like you're like, oh well, Alison hasn't done 4 of these before, then that's you. That's your personality and something that you need. So I'll leave that one there.
Yeah.
But the last thing is, well, two last things. I would scour the internet for information about people. I think if they have a website, go to the website. They've probably built that website. They've put a tone down that they want you to hear. They look at reviews. Reviews are I think a great place. Like my reviews, I found it really interesting that almost all of my clients who have given me reviews have commented on one thing, all one thing. And some people have commented on other things too, but they've all commented on one characteristic that I have. And I won't tell everybody. If you really want to know, then you can Google me. But the point is, but the point is like, there's no doubt after you read my reviews that I have this one characteristic, right? Um, and I'm not telling my clients to write this down. They're doing them. I just send them a link when I'm done. I say, I would appreciate it if you'd write a testimonial or a review for me. That's it. And that's where it goes. And so, that's a really helpful source of information. Okay, last thing. And people ask me this all the time. Can you switch agents during a transaction, or can you use another agent after you've worked with one previously?
So, I mean, just like we were talking about before, a lot of this stuff you can't find out during an interview. You can't find out when you're, sitting down for coffee with them for, a half hour to an hour. So, like, if you get into the transaction and they are talking down to you, or they're, mansplaining or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you aren't feeling like it's going well. Um, in most cases, you don't have to sit with that agent until the end of your or your buyer agency agreement or your listing agreement. But listing agreements are a lot more difficult. They have a definite expiration date. Buyer's agency agreements do as well, but usually most buyer's agency agreements have an escape clause where it's like, if you give
Yep.
me a certain amount of notice, you can get out of it.
Yep.
So you can get out of a buyer's agency agreement certainly and say, I don't think it's working. And in most cases, the buyer's agent's going to be like, if you don't like me, I don't want you to work with me or whatever if it's not working. Um, so
Yeah.
yes,
I mean,
yes,
I think a good
listing
agent,
agreements are a totally different thing. But yeah.
yeah, I think a good agent's interviewing the client as much as the reciprocal. So I mean, that's something I say in all of mine because I'm pretty confident that people aren't going to want to break their agreement with me. But I say, listen, if there's any point this doesn't work out and you don't want to work with me, we have this written into the agreement. I don't want anyone to feel beholden to me if they don't truly feel like they want to be beholden to working with
Mhm.
me. Um, and can you work with another agent after you've worked with one before? Absolutely. Contractually, you're done working with an agent after they've finished a transaction with you.
Mhm.
Hopefully, you want to work with that agent again because they've done a great job and they've, kept in contact with you or whatever. But in the case of your friends that you just talked about, maybe they want to try somebody different because they want to have a better, more personal connection the next time around. So you don't have to feel like you're obligated to work with the same person time and time again. We'll say that.
Yeah. And I mean, to that point that you were talking about before, with clear lines of communication, when you're interviewing an agent, if they're talking more than you are, that's probably a bad sign. You want them to be asking you questions as the client so that they know what you want, they know about you as the client. And if you're asking them to tell you about the process of buying a house or what things look like or whatever, sure, they're going to be talking a lot. And as you and I clearly can talk a lot because we've talked for 20, 34 minutes now. But they should really be listening more than they are talking, because it's about you and learning about you and your wants and needs.
Yeah.
So like that's super, super important when you're interviewing and talking and getting that communication going. And that hopefully will stave off the need to dump them halfway through.
Yeah.
But just be careful and read the agency agreements and make sure that you're within your rights. But in most cases, if you're not jiving with the agent, you can definitely pull the plug.
Yeah.
So.
Well, listen, we're going to bring this one to a close. Probably the longest episode I've ever recorded, but hopefully people found it enthralling. I normally at the end say, reach out if you have any questions. I am happy to kind of expand on some of this a little bit more, but obviously I'm not going to help anybody pick an agent because that would not be ethical or cool of me. But hopefully this gives people a good starting point for how to go about that themselves, or to feel confident in the person that they do have, hearing what we've said. So Michael, thank you for guest co-hosting with me today. And thank you to all of you guys for listening or watching, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks.